Autumn was at its peak on the soil of Devon. Evening was setting in, and the sun was scattering a deep blend of gold and blood red across the horizon. There was a sharp chill in the air that pierced through clothes and pricked the skin. In the peaceful suburbs of Exeter, Exwick, the scent of fallen leaves was mingled in the air. This was an area where people expected peace and safety, where children could roam freely. 14-year-old Kate Bushell was standing on the road in front of her house. There was a slight boredom on her face, common among teenagers of her age. Her mother had asked her to go to the neighbors to look after the dogs. For Katie, who loved dogs, this task wasn't bad, but the chill of the weather and the early evening darkness were making her uneasy. She turned up the collar of her jacket, turned her back to her house, and started walking down the road. Her walk had an innocent confidence. She knew these paths well. The green lanes, hedges covered in lantana, and fields stretching into the distance. But today, everything felt somewhat different. The birds were silent, and with the wind came a strange resonance, as if suppressed words were floating in the air. Katie knocked on the neighbor's door. The door opened and two friendly dogs jumped up in front of her. She fed the dogs, played with them, and then got ready to leave. Stepping outside, she felt the light was fading rapidly from the streets. The street lamps had begun to cast a dim, yellowish light, creating long, distorted shadows. The return path was the same, but now it felt long and unfamiliar. A sound reached her ears like someone walking lightly on leaves. She looked back. The road was empty. Only her own shadow kept her company, lengthening and shrinking in the street lamp's light. She quickened her pace. She was now on a narrow footpath that cut through the fields towards her house. This was the place where an ordinary, tranquil evening turned into a horrific nightmare. Another sound came. This time, it was clear. It wasn't the rustle of leaves, but the sound of heavy breathing, as if someone was hiding close by. Katie's heart began to pound. She started to run. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence. Then, suddenly the shadows moved. From behind the trees, another, deeper and larger shadow emerged. It was a person, but its form and features were unclear. It was merely a dark humanoid silhouette moving rapidly towards her. "Who is it?" Katie's voice trembled. The reply was only silence, but the silhouette was getting closer quickly. Katie broke into a run to save herself, but the entity was even faster. She felt a strong hand clamp over her mouth and a sharp blade slit her throat. After a brief, searing, and horrific sensation of pain, everything went dark. The last image before her eyes was that golden and blood-red sky, now turning completely black. Katie's house was only a few hundred yards away. Her sister, her parents, were all spending their evening as usual. But as time passed, anxiety began to grow in their hearts. Katie should have been back by now. "Perhaps she's gone to a friend's house," her mother said. But there was a hint of suppressed fear in her voice. When the night grew deep and Katie had not returned, the family's worry turned to dread. The police were called. Sergeant Davies, an experienced officer, was the first to deal with such a case. He tried to reassure the family, but a heaviness had settled in his own heart. This was a peaceful area. Children didn't go missing. The search began. Police officers started scouring the lanes and fields in the beam of their torches. The air had grown even colder, and the branches of the trees seemed ready to pounce on them. And then, a young constable's scream tore through the silence of the night. The beam of his torch illuminated a horrific scene. Kate Bushell's body lay by the side of the footpath. Her throat had been cut with a savage force that was unimaginable. Blood had stained the earth around her a deep red. Her eyes were open, preserving the fear of her final moments forever. This wasn't just a murder, it was a message. An act imbued with a madness and anger never before seen in the history of this quiet village. Sergeant Davies looked at the crime scene and realized this wasn't the work of an ordinary criminal. It was something else, something very dark. That night, a new poisonous shadow had been added to the tranquil air of Exwick. A killer, without any apparent purpose or reason, was roaming free. And a question hung in the air across the entire village: who's next? The news of Kate Bushnell's murder spread through Exwick and the surrounding villages faster than the wind. In a place where people didn't even lock their doors at night, a deep, animal-like fear now settled in everyone's eyes. From behind their curtains, people watched the streets intently, jumping at every unusual sound. Parents wouldn't let their children go outside, and even children walking to school were instructed to go in groups. The police investigation intensified. The footpaths and lanes of Exwick were swarming with officers. Forensic experts were scouring the ground inch by inch, bagging every stone, every twig as potential evidence. But no clear evidence was found at the crime scene. No fingerprints, no blood trails that could point to the killer's path. It was as if the killer were a ghost, passing through the air. Deep circles of fatigue and frustration had formed under Sergeant Davies's eyes. The press hounded him, and public pressure was mounting. Do you have any suspects? Is this a serial killer? These questions hung in the air, but Davies had no answers for them. The investigation began a series of interviews with the villagers. Most were terrified, their statements fragmented. But one elderly farmer, Mr. Alden, said something mysterious. He had been working in his field on the day of the incident. "I didn't see anything, Sergeant," he said, straightening his cap, his voice trembling. "But I felt it. There was a change in the air. Not the cold you get from the weather. This was a cold that went right through you, chilled your bones. And then, you know what happened? The birds, which had been chirping all day, suddenly went completely silent. So silent you could hear your own heartbeat." Davies noted this down. It could just be an old man's fancy, but there was a truth shining in his eyes. Around the same time, another strange incident occurred. A young girl from the village, Sarah, claimed she had seen a strange figure on the night of the murder. She was looking out of her window when she spotted a tall, gaunt man heading towards the village cemetery. "He wasn't walking like a normal person, Sergeant," Sarah recounted, her hands shaking. "His gait was jerky, like a bird or an insect, and he was moving very fast. I thought it was a trick of the light, but then he turned and looked towards me. His eyes, they were completely black. No whites, just two black holes." Sarah's statement was noted by the police, but it was largely dismissed as a hysterical delusion. However, a thought had begun to form in Davis's mind. Was this truly an ordinary human killer? Or were the village's old stories, the ones the elders used to tell, proving to be true? Exwick was an old village, its roots embedded in parts of history people had forgotten. In the local pub, the Devil's Dog, the old-timers often told a mythical tale. It was the story of an entity they called the Walker in the Mist. It was a spirit that roamed the fog and took the lives of the innocent. It was identified by its black eyes and a distorted gait. Davies had never paid these stories any mind before. He was a practical man, a man who believed only in evidence. But now, with the evidence dried up and fear spreading on all sides, he was forced to consider these mysterious claims. One night, as Davies sat in his office writing reports, he received a phone call. A mysterious voice, very faint and distorted, said, "He's come back. You can't stop him. You will all die." The line went dead. Davies tried to trace the number, but it came from an old, now disused call box on the far side of the village where nobody went anymore. Now Davies was convinced the matter was something else entirely. This wasn't just a murder. It was the emergence of some ancient, dark force. And he knew he had to get to the bottom of the secret, even if it led him to the edge of madness. But he didn't know that the path to the truth would force him to confront horrifying facts that would shake his very beliefs to their core. For Sergeant Davies, everything had become a puzzle. Kate Bushnell's murder was no longer just a case file. It had become an obsession. The mysterious phone call, the old farmer Mr. Alden's eerie feelings, and the young girl Sarah's mythical story, They were all starting to form a picture that was beyond human rationality. Davies decided to delve into Exwick's past. Perhaps a secret hidden within it held the key to this tragic event. His first port of call was the village library, where old newspaper files and local history records were kept. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, assisted him. When Davies asked about the walker in the mist or any mysterious incidents in the village's past, Mrs. Higgins' face turned serious immediately. "You're not the first person to ask about these things, Sergeant," she said quietly, cleaning her glasses. "The truth is, Exwick hasn't always been peaceful. Many years ago, around the 1920s, I believe, a similar event occurred here." She handed Davies a dusty old file. It was labeled Unsolved Matters, 1919-1925. Davies opened the file and pulled out a news clipping. The date on the paper was 31st October 1923, Halloween night. The headline froze his blood. "Mysterious death of young girl. Locals speak of superstitions linked to ancient over-church graveyard." According to the article, a 15-year-old girl, Alice Dunbar, was found dead in a field on Halloween night. Her throat had been cut. The piece stated that local people believed the death to be the work of the Walker, a spirit that appears every few decades and is linked to a specific graveyard over church. This was the same graveyard where Sarah had seen the strange figure heading. Davies' breath caught. The method was identical. The slashed throat. The gap of decades. Was this merely a coincidence? Or was there truly a curse in Exwick that awoke periodically? He located the over-church graveyard. It was situated on a hill at the edge of the village, filled with mounds of ancient stones and weathered graves. Even the air there felt resonant and listening. As Davies walked through the cemetery, reading the inscriptions on the old headstones, his eyes fell on a particular grave. It was different from the others, ancient, yet it bore no name, only a strange symbol, a broken circle with an eye inside. The earth near the grave felt sunken, as if someone had been digging there recently. The ground seemed to tremble under Davies' feet. He caught a strange smell, like rotten soil and dead animal. He turned to look behind him. In the distance, at the far end of the graveyard, stood a tall, thick black silhouette. The silhouette wasn't moving, it just stood there, staring at Davies. Davies took out his torch and shone the light towards it. The light shattered the silhouette. There was nothing there, only an old leaning gravestone. But Davies felt his heart pounding. He knew he hadn't been alone. Something, or someone, had been watching him. He had to get out of there. That night, Davies sat back in his office, pondering all of it. The 1923 murder down over church graveyard. The nameless grave. He tried to convince his supervisor that the case was taking a supernatural turn, but his supervisor just laughed it off. "Davies, you've been reading too many detective novels. It's a human killer, not a ghost. Focus on the evidence." Frustrated, Davies decided to head home. On the way, his car engine suddenly cut out, in a spot where it had never happened before. He got out and opened the bonnet. Everything seemed fine. Suddenly he heard the rustle of leaves behind him. He turned around. The shadows of the dense trees by the roadside were shifting. One shadow detached itself from the others and began moving towards him. It was the same tall, distorted silhouette he had seen in the graveyard. Its movement had the same jerky quality. Davies drew his service pistol. "Stop! Police!" he shouted. But the silhouette didn't stop. It was getting closer rapidly. Davies raised his pistol, but before he could fire, the silhouette dissolved into the air like smoke. Only a sliding, ghastly laugh echoed in the air. Davies stood there, trembling. He was convinced now. The killer was not human. It was something else, something very old and very dark. And it wasn't over yet. He knew that Halloween night was approaching. And history was preparing to repeat itself. Halloween night had arrived. A mysterious thick fog had descended upon Exwick, unlike any usual weather fog. This fog was deep, not white, but gray, and it carried the smell of rotten leaves and decayed earth. The village was silent. The question of celebrating Halloween simply didn't arise. Every door and window was locked tight. People sat in the dark, waiting for the night to pass. Sergeant Davies could not stay at home. He knew this night would be decisive. After the 1923 newspaper clipping and his own terrifying encounter, his mind was clear. The Walker was not a legend. It was a reality, a malevolent spirit that, every few decades, on Halloween night, gained power and took an innocent life to sate its hunger. And this time, its gaze was on the youth of Exwick. Its target was still unknown, but Davies was certain the killer would return to its old territory over Church Graveyard. He got into his police car and drove through the fog-cloaked lanes towards the cemetery. The car radio crackled with static and then fell completely silent. Standing outside the graveyard, Davies found himself surrounded by the same cold Mr. Alden had described, a cold that chilled to the bone. He gripped his torch and pistol and stepped through the rusty iron gate. The graves were bathed in fog, their shadows casting strange shapes. He moved towards the specific nameless grave with the strange symbol. And then he saw it. Someone was standing by the grave. It was the same tall, gaunt silhouette, but now it was more distinct despite the fog. Davies raised his torch and shone the light on it. The sight that met his eyes rooted him to the spot. It was not a ghost or a fantastical creature. It was a man, or had once been a man. Its face was dead and rotten, the skin sallow and stretched tight over bone. But its eyes were exactly as Sarah had described, deep, utterly black, with no light within them. Its hands were long and thin, with nails like sharp, filthy daggers. This was the Walker. "Stop!" Davies' voice trembled, but there was strength in it. "Your game is over." The Walker tilted its head, a choked, lifeless sound coming from its throat. "Game? This is no game. It is an old promise, a pact. This land gave me life, and now I require life in return." Davies understood. This was not an aimless spirit. It was the guardian of the graveyard, or perhaps a criminal buried alive in this soil centuries ago, now taking its revenge at appointed times. "You killed that girl, Kate Bushell!" Davies shouted. "Her spirit sated my hunger," the Walker said, taking a step forward. "Now I require another, the energy of your youth, your hope." "It is my sustenance!" Davies decided to fire. The bullet embedded itself in the Walker's chest, but it had no effect. It smiled, a ghastly, soulless smile. "You cannot kill me, Protector. I am already dead." The Walker moved towards Davies with unnatural speed. Davies fired again, but the Walker vanished into the air and reappeared right in front of him the next moment. Its decaying hand clamped around Davies' throat. The strength was immense. Davies struggled to breathe. He felt darkness creeping into his vision. Then suddenly, the sound of dogs barking came from afar. Memories of Kate Bushell, her innocent face, flashed through Davies' mind. He felt a new power. He raised his hand and pressed his pistol against one of the Walker's black eyes and fired. The Walker recoiled with a horrific shriek. It wasn't the ordinary bullet, it was the force of human resolve and justice that was causing it pain. It shrieked as it retreated, its form beginning to change, to dissolve into the air. "You cannot stop me. I will return. I always return." Its voice echoed in the air, and then it was gone. The fog began to lift, and the cold diminished. Peace returned to the graveyard. Davies collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. He knew the Walker could not be destroyed, only pushed back temporarily. The curse was not broken, but for this night, the village was safe. When morning came, people saw Sergeant Davies emerging from the graveyard, exhausted but alive. He told no one the full story of that night. The official report stated that the killer's trail had gone cold and the case was filed away, unsolved. But Exwick was forever changed. People still locked their doors at dusk. And on Halloween night, everyone stayed indoors, waiting in silence to see if a long, thin silhouette would emerge once more from the shadows. Sergeant Davies kept a permanent watch on that nameless grave. He knew the true killer was still there, neither alive nor dead, simply waiting for the next Halloween night, when the fog would grow thick again and old packs would demand their due.